Hi, I'm Ed Justice Jr., and this is the Petersen Museum podcast. Our guest today is Bobby Rahal, driver, Indy 500 winner, team owner. In fact, Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan won the Indy 500 this year with Takuma Sato as their driver. Bobby's also a big supporter of the Petersen, and he's on the board of directors. It's great to get a chance to talk with you today, Bobby. Welcome.
Thanks, Ed. Good being with you as well.
Yeah, I tell you, that was a great race, and boy, congratulations.
Thank you.
There's one thing that's seems to be the case is Takuma has a lot of passion when it comes. He's a 10/10 driver.
Oh yeah. No, he knows which one to win. That's for sure. But of course, Takuma's been there before. The month really, we qualified well. He was on the front row, of course. Graham was eighth. So as a team, we had a pretty strong qualifying. We did a lot of laps. They really prepared themselves well. And I think the end result was, all that hard work really paid off. And it was good, obviously good for Takuma to win, but then for Graham to be right on their heels in third, literally within a second of the lead. It was interesting. Dixon was saying, "Oh, I wish there'd been a restart," and thinking that probably he would have gotten a shot at Takuma. But I think the guy who had a shot at both of them might have been Graham. So who knows? But we're real happy with the first and the third. Been pretty happy with the overall performance of the team this year as a whole. And there's 3 races to go, so hopefully we can end up on a good note.
Yeah, absolutely. You're the getting first and third, and then having your other car crash there at the end.
Yeah,
reminded me in a very slight way, but not even close, to Andy Granatelli's 1973 Indy. Mm-hmm. They won. Swede Savage unfortunately died in a crash a right. few weeks later, a pit crew member. You had a much milder extreme, but the fact that Spencer's car held up like it did with that side impact, of course, the attenuator that Bill Simpson designed.
Yeah.
Big.
Oh yeah, that's a huge. Well, the track is, certainly a lot safer than it was when I drove there, and even more so when guys in the 60s and 70s drove there and 50s. The safer walls is probably one of the best inventions ever in motorsport. And that was really funded by Tony George. He gets a lot of criticism about things, but I have to tell you that he's the one who stood up for that. And that safer wall's everywhere now, not just in IndyCar, it's in NASCAR, it's even in Formula One. And, that certainly softens the blow when you hit the wall by a fair amount. And then, of course, the cars are a lot safer. The attenuator at the beginning of the back of the pit lane, that's not the first time that's been hit. It's been hit before. And I think it's, that was a great invention as well. Another element and all the things that have been done to make speedway racing better and safer. And I'm pleased. We were obviously happy that Spencer wasn't hurt, because he took a hell of a shot. He's okay. And you can always fix the cars. For me, I was just pleased he was okay, and we certainly didn't need to win the race by writing off a whole car. So,
as I asked Gurney a few years ago, and you'll get a kick out of that, I said, "Dan, how do you budget for crash damage and all that?" He said, "I didn't know a race team had a budget."
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. Yeah. A budget's just there to be exceeded.
Yeah. Hey, it's a starting point.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about you. How old were you when you got started?
When I first started, I was 20, because in the States, you had to be considered an adult, legally an adult, to race. And in 72, the voting age was 21, and that was kind of the determinant of what an adult was. And then in '73 is when they lowered the voting age to 18. So all of a sudden, we could drive. And I was, as I said, I was 20. I was in my second year of racing, and while I was at university, and so that was great. But we didn't really. They had go-kart racing, but we really didn't do any of that back in Illinois to any large extent, or at least I didn't. And so, the first time I got into a car really in any kind of semi-serious way was in probably, I think it was like May of 1973.
So Parnelli started like at 21. You were more like the old school drivers.
Yeah, no, and that was the way. And of course, in those days, no owner was going to hire a rookie. They wanted guys who were seasoned, had a lot of experience. You look at the careers of, Johnny Rutherford, John Cock, Mario, Bobby, all the answers, all those guys were when I was a rookie at Indy in '82 and I was 29 years old. This year the rookie at Indy is like 18. So, it just shows you, and kids today are far more prepared for it, I think, than we were. Whether because of karting, a lot of people, that's kind of the place to be, especially if you have any inclination towards driving professionally. So you have to go karting in a major way. And so these kids are, showing up 14, 15 years old to drive some of the lower, the lower class Formula cars. And, first off, they can't have a driver's license. They're too young. But more importantly, they've had years of experience in really intense racing. So that when they get into a car, it's kind of second nature for them.
Tell me about what it does for a driver like yourself when you go from, say, sports car racing, open wheel, endurance racing. I asked Phil Hill one time about endurance racing, and what I found, his answer was very era specific in that, well, you just had to make the car last. Today, right. Endurance racing is basically a sprint race.
Right.
You're on the throttle the whole way through. But how does that affect you as a driver, changing the cars? Because obviously, like say Jimmy Johnson's going to be going from a big heavy car with basically no brakes to a lighter car with a lot of brakes. How is that transition, and how's that play for a driver like you?
Yeah, for Jimmy, it's going to be a big change. Just the overall envelope where an IndyCar performance versus a NASCAR, stock car is so different. The handling characteristics, the braking, as you say, the acceleration, the reaction, time of the car, how quickly it can react. Stock cars, much more lethargic, I guess I would say, compared to an Indy car. So it'll be interesting how he and the physical intensity. You don't have power steering, you don't have cool suits, you don't have all the stuff that they do in NASCAR. So it's going to be a different thing. But getting back to what you were saying, so I started out in sports car racing, and of course my goal was to get to Formula One, and I began racing Formula cars as quickly as I could. And I still feel this way today because even when you see guys in sedan type racing in Europe or wherever, a lot of them, especially as they go on in their professional career, a lot of them were quite good in junior categories. And so that, Formula 3, Formula 2, whatever the case may be, that they weren't really in production car categories in the beginning. And so, I started in open wheel racing. I really wanted to, as I say, get to Formula One. And I got there, but not very long. Did a couple races. And then I got into sports cars. And, I'd always, my father had raced sports cars, so I was always interested in that. And I have to say, I think I'd always been a pretty fast driver, but I'm not sure that I was that smart, frankly, in the beginning. Like any young driver, you're looking for experience. And I think sports car racing, I won Daytona in 1981, the 24-hour with Brian Redman, won Sebring, did other endurance races. And I think my experience in endurance races really helped me become a better sprint driver, because it does teach you to go fast and yet save the car. And as you said, even in my day in the beginnings of IndyCar, it was still pretty, it wasn't that sophisticated. It's not like today where you can't over rev it downshifting. Now the electronics and everything won't allow the gear to be chosen because the RPM, it's not in the right RPM bracket. In my time, you didn't have that. So you could very easily over rev the engine by downshifting too early or missing a shift or whatever. That's not possible today. So it's, I really do think that endurance racing was a big help to me in my career and how I approached it and how I drove the car.
Yeah. Well, you're not alone when it comes to thinking that you could have been smarter. I've heard so many drivers say that. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's taking the bait with another driver or whatever. I mean, there's just any number of ways that can play out. But your dad was a big influence then. I mean, by osmosis, when you were growing up, then, I mean, just that in itself, you enjoyed your time at the racetrack and everything that went with that.
Yeah. Well, I did. I mean, I was very fortunate. My dad, starting in the mid 50s, had sports cars. He had a Triumph TR2. We had a Jensen. We had, a bunch of stuff, Alfa Romeo and old Porsches and you name it. So that's where I hung out. That was my after school life, my weekend life. Went racing with my dad. My summers were Little League baseball and going racing with my dad. And of course, SCCA was such a family oriented part of motor racing anyway. You develop friendships with people, friendships that still last today. And we're talking 50 years ago. In some cases, maybe a few more than that. So, just really enjoyed it. Although again, because, my father was in the food business, there was never the expectation that I would drive, let alone drive professionally. I just thought that was a little bit out of reach, frankly, that, my life, I was supposed to go to college, get a good job. Presumably, I think that meant going into the family business, but I didn't want to go into the family business. So that took care of that. But luckily he had these old race cars and I started racing those. And I'm really fortunate because I don't know, I tell people, I don't know if I found racing or it found me, but whatever, here we are. And I feel very fortunate. I'm very lucky to have had all those experiences, and I know, you're very similar in the sense that, when I was a kid in the 60s, we were going to the drag races, we were going to the sprint car races, we were going to the road races, we were going, you name it. As you well know, that was an unbelievable time in our sport. And so, I just ate it up, I lived it. And so consequently, since I started racing, it's really been a bit of a fairy tale for me. I've really been very fortunate.
It was a great time to grow up. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, we could go on about that. We could do a whole interview just on that by itself. I watched the race at Mid-Ohio. You guys were there this last weekend. And it looked to me, they got a new tower, don't they? Is a new tower?
There's a scoring tower that is new, yes.
It looked like they repainted all the roofs new red, and it looked beautiful on TV. I got to tell you, the green grass, of course, with all that. And I can't help but when I see that and I see that property, think about the influence of Jim Truman, and who, of course, had a big influence on your career.
Right.
And I mean, you guys had, it was more than a car owner, team owner, driver relationship. It appeared on the outside. And of course, when you won Indy, I can't think in my lifetime any more emotional victory in victory lane than with Jim there, who was suffering from cancer. And it was clear to everybody that he probably didn't have a lot of time left. And here you delivered that win that he so wanted. I mean, what effect did Jim, because he was just a great guy from the outside, everybody. What effect did he have on your career?
Oh, well, I really don't think, I think it's arguable that I would have had a career because the reason I say this is, I first met Jim when I was doing the SCCA races back in the Midwest here in '73. And then got to know him better in 74. I was going to a university that was probably 30 miles east of where he lived in Columbus, Ohio. He was a part owner of a bar in Columbus, an area called German Village, which is this old part of Columbus, brick streets and, rathskellers and what have you, really kind of a neat place. And anyway, I became, in some respects, I kind of felt like I became part of the Truman family because I spent a lot of time over there. And, Jim was just a guy that, he was my first, what I would call, commercial sponsor. In 74, he sponsored me to go to the Pro Formula Atlantic race that preceded the 74 US Grand Prix. And he gave me $500. And I thought that was all the money in the world. I thought, unbelievable that some guy would give you $500 to go to a race. Next year was a little bit more, and the year after that was. And no matter, even when I raced in Europe, he gave me a sponsorship so I could fly back and forth to the States. He was always involved with me in some way, shape, or form. Not in a major way, but just a little way. And in I went, so in 78, I was in Grand Prix racing. 79, had a great year in Can-Am. I did half the Can-Am series. I replaced George Fulmer and the team he drove with. At the end of 79, everybody Paul Newman wanted me to drive for him. Carl Haas wanted me to drive for him. There were all these guys. And I decided to stay with the fellow that brought me to the dance, so to speak. And we just had a miserable year. And, 1 year later, you go from being the belle of the ball to somebody nobody wants, And I really struggled in 81. Finally, of course, we won Daytona 24-hour, which was wonderful at the start of the year, but I was still struggling for rides, and I didn't really have any sponsorship to speak of. Jim, about halfway through that year, Jim said to me, if you're smart, you'll say yes to everything I say. And of course, I knew Jim, obviously, and trusted whatever he would say would be right. And so I said, okay, yes, to everything. And he said, well, I want to go to Indy. I want to start our own team. You need to put the people together to do that. Let me hire them. You need to go find people to buy the cars and the engines. I'll put up the rest of it. And that was and the reason I'm bringing it up is because by the end of 81, I think my career could just as easily ended as going on. And, but with that offer and with what we had to do to get ready for the 82 season, that kind of, I always felt that kind of saved me. And in 82, of course, we were rookie of the year in IndyCar racing. We won 2 of the 9 races that we ran in. We're on our way to finish in the top 5 at Indy, and then we had an engine failure with about 10 laps to get left. But and then all of a sudden, you're the flavor of the month again, right? You're everybody wants to take you to the dance. So, but I always stayed loyal to Jim, and I would go over to his house, watch football with him. In fact, Tim Cindric, who's Roger Penske's right-hand man on the IndyCar program, Tim married Megan Truman. And when I was over at the Truman house, Megan was probably about 3 years old, and she'd sit there and bounce on my knee, and we'd watch football and drink beer. So, the relationship I had with the family was extensive. So, clearly a lot of appreciation for what Jim did. But I always tell people, it wasn't just me that benefited from Jim's support. It was Willie T. Ribs. Jim was a big supporter of Willie T's. There's a woman driver named Kat Kaiser from Columbus, Ohio, who won a SEC national championship that he supported. He probably had 5 or 6 or 7 cars in various types of racing all over the country in those years. So he was just the kind of guy that really, he gave young people a chance. And I think the biggest thrill he got out of it was to see them take the ball and run with it.
He was what they would call a true patron of the arts. The arts that he loved just happened to be auto racing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk about when you went to Indy, because I've heard different stories. Danny Sullivan, a good friend of mine, mutual friend of ours, Rocky Moran, you guys were all sort of contemporaries in that era, coming out of the Can-Am, Second Coming and all that. And you and Danny went to Indy about the same time, within a year or two, and much later.
Right.
And but I remember hearing. I mean, you go to Indy, the first thing everybody hears about is turn one. Okay, the infamous turn one.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've driven in a car around Indianapolis, but that's, it's like I say to people about driving a car at 100 miles an hour today. I go, some of these cars, you can get to 100 miles an hour so quick, it's not a big deal until you hit a solid object. And then it gets, and I mean, whistling into turn one at like today's speeds, somewhere around 240 or whatever, and whatever the speeds over 200 back in your era. I mean, the stands have their effect. It's a flat turn, basically.
Yeah, pretty flat.
I mean, was it 9 degrees or whatever?
I think it's 11, I believe. 9 or 11, yeah.
Anyway, it isn't much. We know that.
No.
And so, I mean, how does a driver like yourself work up to that? Because I mean, you got to think, the average person's got to think that in your mind, it's saying, I don't know about this, but you're also at the same time saying to your foot, stay in it, feeling it out, etc. I mean, how's that work?
Well, I think, the first time I drove there, it was for rookie orientation, which I think was in April of '82. And I remember getting to the track, and I'd been to Le Mans, I'd been over 200 miles an hour, I'd been to Daytona, I'd been to, a lot of tracks that were fast. And but when I got there, and you're going out, down out of turn 2 towards turn 3, and I said the first thing that struck me was that an IndyCar was the first car that I ever drove that never stopped accelerating. It never ran into that brick wall, that arrow brick wall, where it couldn't go any faster. It just kept that tack just kept going up. That was impressive, number one. Number two was it was a cold, gray day, and there were nobody in the stands. And of course, you've been there. All the stands are like battleship gray, and it was really intimidating. I thought. I mean, it really, and it snowed, started snowing, and thankfully they put a halt to it. And we were able to go away, but I just remember feeling pretty uncomfortable with it. And but we were able to go away and be able to think about it, and then you go back for the real the real thing come May 1st or whatever day it was, and at least you know what to expect, which is helpful. But still, like you say, in those days nobody was flat. Even in '82, I'm not even sure. Maybe in '83 they were. And the only way, to be able to tune a car to do all that, you actually kind of have to go through this barrier. And the tough part about that is you have to be in a position that if a car starts to get away from you, you can save it. So you have to push it over the edge just to know what the car is going to do, at that speed. And if it's loose, okay, we'll take a little wing out in the front, or we'll do this or do that. If it's pushing, you do whatever takes care of that. But you have to go over that line to find out what it will do. If you don't go over, you're just going to go around there at the same speed. And I think that's why certain people always do well there. They're willing to, they have the ability to take it over the edge, and yet rein it back in if it starts to get away from them. I, to be honest with you, I didn't really feel that good there the whole month. But in the race, it all came to me. And in the race, I was racing with Al Senior for like 5th place. It was John Cock and Rick Mears, and I can't remember who was third. Then we were like 4th, 5th, this little group of us. And, I was having fun. I mean, it just came something, the light, somebody switched the light on. And so I felt a whole lot better about being there in the whole race at that stage. And then kind of always felt, never had a problem with it ever. But, Indy, I always tell people, and I'd like to say that I made this up, but I didn't. I think somebody drove in the 60s did. But they said every time they left the track, the sky was bluer and the grass was greener. And that's kind of true, because you're out there pounding around that place looking for 1/10 of a mile an hour. And it's not very forgiving. When you have a problem, you usually have a big problem. And so like he said, when you left that day, you felt pretty good about things.
Well, again, back to the safer walls, because that's the preferred term over softer walls.
Right.
But yeah, that was all pre that. That was when
82 to 80, I want to say 6, maybe 85, 86, can't remember exactly. But your feet were ahead of the front axle.
That wasn't bad.
So if you, and a lot of poor guys, Rick Mears being one of them, Jim Crawford was another. A lot of poor guys, their careers pretty much were cut short by being injured, in one of those kind of accidents where the front just collapses on you. So it was, I was lucky to come out of that era with hardly a scratch.
Yeah, I remember that era so well. I said John Andretti, but it was Jeff Andretti in turn two. Foyt.
92.
Yeah, and got hurt. Derek Daly, he got, as I remember.
Nelson Piquet at Indy in practice. I mean, it's a long list.
And for the people watching, I mean, it really was true. The driver's feet were out ahead of the tires. And it sounds like a crazy concept today, but it was the March was a very competitive chassis.
Mm-hmm, sure. Yeah.
That was the only way to prevent that was the way that they did was to rule it back in.
Right.
To set the rules where the driver's feet had to be back of the, which it's light years difference today.
Yeah. And then one thing they did later on, not till really, I think it was the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, is they had fairly substantial minimum dimension requirements. Because in 1990, when I got into 1990 Lola, I thought my career was going to be over. If it kept going the way it was going, I wouldn't fit in the car in 91. And, part of my problem I fight today is I have these back issues, and I never had a seat. All during my IndyCar career, I never had a seat because I was always tall. And I was sitting on the floor, so there's nothing there to cushion any kind of blow. And I mean, as I said, the 90 car was so small. I mean, it was fast, but it was so small, and if you hit something, it was going to hurt. And thankfully, actually, more about the time Graham got into Formula Atlantic and into Indy cars in the early 2000s did they start to push out those minimum dimensions so a guy who's 6'4" could fit in a car and have a seat. In 1981, I drove for Paul Newman. I replaced Al Allister Sr. in his March Chevrolet Can-Am car, and replaced Al Sr. about halfway through the year. And I went to get in the car, and I had no seat, no back of the seat, no seat on the bottom. My shins were on the steering rack. My feet were ahead of the front axle, and but you're young and you're desperate and you'll do anything to get a ride, right? So you do it, but you think back and think, geez, I mean, it wouldn't have taken much to break a lot of stuff, because there was no room for anything.
When you talk about your shins being on the steering rack, it doesn't take much impact for the back to come back on your shins, and like you say, you're breaking all sorts of stuff. When you to clarify for people watching, when you say you're sitting on the floorboard, it's also you're talking bare aluminum and bare aluminum back.
Right.
I mean, this is worse than the worst bench you've ever sat in a park. I mean, this is bad.
Yeah.
I remember when Rocky drove for Foyt that one time, his hips were so wide that they literally had to cut out the side of the tub.
Right. Yeah.
Which, people, if they hear that, they go, really? Oh yeah, no, I saw that.
Rocky was bigger than I figured if Rocky could fit in anything, I could, but, or it's like Dan Gurney. How the hell Dan fit in a lot of the stuff that he drove? Dan's even taller than I am, but,
well, yeah,
as I said, you're young, you're trying to make your way, and the last thing you're going to do is turn down a ride because you didn't fit in the car. You'd figure a way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one more thing on Indy and about driving there, and then we'll move on to something else. But I've heard this, and I think you and I have even talked about this. The one thing that you can't be prepared for as a new driver is the start.
Yeah.
And particularly if you happen to be deeper into the field. The turbulence, the fumes that are facing. We watch it on TV, and of course, I got a drink in one hand, whether it be a soft drink, whatever, and I got the AC on, and the couch feels really good. And I'm watching the big screen, or if I'm in a suite at Indianapolis, I'm watching it there, and I'm thinking, okay, this is great. Yeah, hey, could you turn down the air just a little bit more? And you guys have field and you can't see, and the turbulence I hear is just pretty impressive. And plus it's like a giant street sweeper cleaning the track the first few laps, I guess, isn't it? Tell us about it.
I'll tell you, the more impressive one to me was the start of Michigan International Speedway. But to get back to Indy, the big thing about Indy was the accordion effect. Because when you're back in the last couple rows, you're at the start-finish line and you're having to get out of the throttle because everybody starts backing up and you just get this big accordion effect. And so you got to be really aware of that. Young drivers, when they come, the rookies, you got to tell them, hey, listen, you need to let's just get through turn one, then worry about going racing. Don't try to make up space because I think it was in the last 2 years of my career at Indy in 94, 95, we had major accidents on turn one on the first lap. So, and so you just, you got to try to instill some judgment in some of these young guys because they all want to show everybody how good they are. But at Michigan, I'll never forget this. This is 82. Those cars didn't burn the fuel as efficiently as they do now. And of course, there's a single turbo. It had, big wastegate. And when you were in the pits just warming up, your eyes were always you were tearing because if the wind was coming from the back, all those methanol fumes would come into the cockpit and you could barely breathe. And so the first lap, I'll never forget, Michigan, I'm going down there and there's this I'm probably midfield maybe. And, there's just this yellow haze that's hot and it's just full of unburnt fuel and burnt fuel. And it was the most noxious environment to be in. I mean, it's horrible, right? And you could barely breathe and you're going down there at 200 miles an hour. And of course, that's just because everybody's so together and you get, you just get that. That was more impressive to me than Indy just because, everything was yellowish. It looked like one of these pictures of the fires in Northern California. The sky just went yellow and these horrible fumes. And you had to deal. You come in for a pit stop and you were holding your breath because you don't dare take a breath in case all the fumes come towards you. So that was pretty impressive. Thankfully that you don't see that anymore. But yeah, those days, those first few years in IndyCar were, especially the first two, I would say were eye openers for me, for sure.
Yeah. So, everybody talks about how your life changes when you win Indy.
Yeah.
And, and you won Indy once, you won the championship 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny, everybody always remembers Indianapolis. And how does that change your life as a driver? I mean,
Well, clearly, in a number of ways. I mean, professionally, now other teams are interested in you because you bring value, not just your driving value, but you bring the ability to win the 500s. So sponsors are interested in that. Obviously, teams are interested in that, and so your value as a driver within the industry just goes up considerably because you won the race. So I think that's foremost. And of course, the more you win it, the more you can, I presume, I've only done it once, but the more value you bring even beyond that. Now, it's interesting with Sato now having won it twice. I'm going to ask him later on this year if it's true that he's worth more now than he was, after one. But yeah, I mean, it's just from a commercial standpoint, you bring more value, and teams want that, sponsors want that. Everybody wants to be with a winner. That's just the reality. And of course, Indy, if you're going to win a race in the IndyCar series, Indy is the race to win. And it sounds simple, very difficult to achieve. But yeah, it has. I don't know what other sport, maybe, I don't know, Wimbledon and tennis, maybe the Masters in golf has the same effect, but they're not really team sports. IndyCar is a team sport, and so I don't know of anything in the in baseball, maybe the World Series. I don't know, but yeah, that's the impact it has on you. And then of course, because it has that impact on you personally, you're impacted in a very positive way. You start making more money. There's always personal sponsorships. There's this, there's that, and so you're in a better place financially. And I think even today, it's been 86, so it's 34 years, 34 or 40, 34 years since I won. And even today, when we're being introduced to people, I'm never introduced as the 3-time IndyCar champion, which I think was a lot harder to achieve, frankly. You're always introduced as the 1986 Indy 500 winner, and and by the way, you won 3 championships too. So that's just wherever you go, it follows you the rest of your life. And no one ever, and it was a great race, and it was a hard race, but nobody ever introduces me as the Portland 200 winner. Now, maybe when I'm in Portland, they might, for obvious reasons, but and I don't mean to make light of it, but that's just the impact that Indy has, and it just dwarfs everything else around.
Well, you mentioned how hard it is to, and you sometimes see on the internet some of these armchair warriors, and about a driver. Well, he doesn't want to go to Indy because come on, they just go in circles, and it's really, there's nothing to prove there, et cetera, et cetera. We both heard plenty of this stuff over the years, but here's the reality. Take Fernando Alonso, who is a great driver, a great guy, really of the old school mentality, is open to driving anything, wants to drive anything, wants to win in everything. And, the first year he came, he was with Andretti, so he was with a good team, and he had a really good result and looked like maybe even might have a chance to hit victory lane. And then the next year he didn't qualify. And then this year he struggled. And then you have a guy like Jimmy Johnson who's going to come to IndyCar, and one race he won't run will be the Indy 500. And it's not because it's an easy race to run. And you yourself had one year you didn't qualify. Roger Penske had one year when they didn't qualify.
Right.
Roger struggled this year at Indianapolis. It really is hard to put your hands on, and everything has to just really come together to end into victory lane.
Absolutely. Well, it is. It's so true. And the team is absolutely critical to a driver's opportunities. The smallest changes, now you're all driving the same car, different engines, but the same chassis. And yet some guys are qualifying up front and some guys are qualifying at the back. And the thing that's impressive now is the compression in the terms of the difference in time and speed between the first guy on the grid and the last guy on the grid. It used to be 15, 20 miles an hour. I think it was this year or last year, it was like 5. That was the difference, over 4 laps. And it might have been 5, might have been a little bit less than 5. And it's so intense now, and it's so competitive that, it was tough in my day to win or to finish in the top 6 or maybe the top 10. Today, it's tough to finish in the top 20. And, I know I get the comments, and it really kind of irks me because I've seen the steering traces of these guys when they're qualifying, and they're turning right as much as they're turning left. And at 200, and they're going to turn 1 at 245 in qualifying. And we talked about, you mentioned earlier what it's like at turn 1. I can tell you, when you're coming into turn 1 at any speed, anything over 225, it looks like you're driving into your broom closet. I mean, it's blind. You don't really see the apex. And it's kind of a leap of faith. You go in there and you know where you want to be, and you've got your foot down. You have to commit now, way before the actual corner. Whereas in the old days, before ground effects, you kind of drove it on the rear end, that you get off a little earlier and then drive it on the throttle through the corner. Today, you drive it on the front wheels because you have to carry the speed in, you have to commit. And that takes no small amount of bravery to do it, because especially if you're not quite sure what lies on the other side. And so for people to claim that these cars are easy to drive today is just is wrong. It's that simple. And of course, these guys are driving on top of each other too all the time. They're in a pack, which I think, fortunately for me in my day, you never really had that too much. But no, these guys are driving these cars today are as good as they've ever been. And I think any driver of the old days or my era, or maybe the year before me, would tell you the same thing. These guys can pedal these cars.
Yeah, I agree. I wish there was some way to for all of us that aren't drivers to experience what it's like at the speeds that you're running, to have just a little bit of looseness in the rear end, and how that just gets attention more.
It'll pucker you up in a hurry.
Yeah.
It's like I tell the young guys, when they go to Indy, never been there, I said, the best sensor you have in that car is your ass. And if your ass is telling you it thinks you're going into that corner too fast, it's right. Listen to your ass. Do not listen to anybody else. And that may sound simplistic and maybe a little crude, but it is so true. You've got to listen to what your ass is telling you and your mind is telling you, because your mind will do everything it can to overcome. If you're a little fearful or a little unsure, it's going to say, oh, don't be a coward. Go in there. You can do it. And in the meantime, your ass is saying, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And the guys who listen to their ass end up being okay.
Yeah, that's good. So now Graham, who's a great guy, and I know Graham, and he's been, last weekend, great race at Mid-Ohio. It started out that it was no secret that the relationship between you and Graham needed a little bit of help or refinement, or you had to find out how to dance together the right way. And once you guys did, the rest now has been history. And so what was it like working through and having your son come in? First of all, how receptive were you in the beginning when Graham said, hey, Dad, I want to become a race car driver? And, you've seen behind the curtain, as they say.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I was not supportive of him driving, in part because I didn't want him to feel like he had to live up to something. My father raced, but my father did it purely as a hobby. We never had the latest car. We never had this, never had that. And, if we finished 5th or 6th, that was pretty good. We were pretty happy with that. So I never had that pressure that I had to live up to something. Whereas Graham, and just like a Marco Andretti or even the Michael Andretti when he was young, they're going up. They have a pretty impressive background, and what their fathers did, or aunts or uncles, I should say, or whatever. And so, I didn't want him to feel like he had to live up to anything. If he wanted to race, I guess I was okay with that, but I just wanted him to do his own thing. So he kept bugging me. Anybody who knows Graham can tell you he's a very persevering guy. He'll wear you down. And, I finally said, okay, you have to excel in school. And if you excel in school, then I'll do everything I can to help you in karting, which we did. He did. He lived up to his end of the deal. And I think the best thing that happened to Graham in his career, because ultimately he's judged by his peers, but he was hired by Newman Haas Lanigan, one of the best teams in IndyCar in the history of it. He was Justin Wilson's teammate. He was Sebastian Bourdais' teammate. He was the last Newman Haas driver to win a race in 2008. So his name at the Newman Haas headquarters, they have these banners with all the people who've won races over the years. And there's Jackie Stewart, and there's Jackie Ickx, and there's Alan Jones and Brian Redmond, all these great drivers. And there's Graham Rahal. So that's pretty cool. And then he goes to drive for Chip, which is even better because, here he is, he's 20 years old and he's driving for Chip Ganassi. But then, the opportunity really came And, we had started the IndyCar team in 12, and in part because I wanted to prepare it in the event we were to work together, and which we did. And but the first couple of years, I said to him at the time, I said, this is going to be really tough because you have to treat me like the owner, and I have to treat you like the driver, not like father or son. That's easy to say. That's very, very difficult to do. And because naturally, if you love your kids or if they love you, there's emotion gets in there. And in racing, I think emotion's the enemy. You don't want emotion. And when you're driving a race car, you want to be emotionally calm and stable, and all that kind of stuff. And so we worked together for a year and had some good races, but there were times, not many, but there were a few times where the father-son element came out. And so I just said at the end of that year, I said, I'm out, I'm done. I'm not even going to be in the pits, because, you need to be professional with your guys. You need to be emotionless. My job's to go find money. Your job's to go drive the race car. We've got people to run it. And since I did that, he's won a bunch of races. And so, I'm still there, but I'm not on the radio. I'm not in the pit complex. I just think it's better for them to do what they need to do without me in there. And because I think there's an added, I think even the mechanics feel an added pressure if I'm in there, because, you don't want to screw up pit stop. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. So it's better that I'm not there. And then I think the results have shown it. And I have no problem with it because I'm always taking care of our sponsors anyway. So, I think we're at a good spot. And Graham has a good relationship with an engineer that now they're in their third year. He's never really had an engineer before for that long. So that's a big positive. And I think we're seeing the results of that by his performances this year. So, at some point you have to make decisions that seem a little odd, or make decisions that kind of fly in the face of what should be the way it should be. But in my heart and in my head, I knew that the best thing I could do was to back away, focus on the fundraising side, the money side, and just make sure that that we have the right people doing the right things, and we can go win races. And so we've done that with not just Graham, but Sato, and so it's working out pretty good right now.
Well, I will tell you, I could find you some pretty big name business people, managers, et cetera, that would say that that's a sign of a good structure that you've built. And that's really the true sign of a successful organization, when you can remove the principal and it can continue to operate. Yeah. I mean, it's not good when you see corporations where the person is such a key person and you remove them and the corporation falls down. So right. I would say there's a strong argument that the way that you've structured your organization is really a good sign towards you, and really the way that you want it to be. So I've
been very proud of where the morning of the race, the morning of the 500, everybody was in the garage and we had a little pep talk. And I told everybody I've never been as happy with where we are as a team than I was that morning. We'd added people over the years, changed people, brought new people in, moved people around. And I thought we were really seeing the benefit of that. And I think you're right. You hire people to do a job. So the last thing you want to do is tell them what to do. I mean, otherwise, why'd you hire them? So for me, it was all about, now my view, maybe 5-7 years ago, my view was at 10,000 feet. Now my view is 35,000 feet. And the team manager's view is at 10,000, and the president's view is at 20,000. You have a layer cake of responsibility. And the people we brought in, I feel very happy with the quality of the people that we have in the team today. And, that doesn't mean we're not going to go out and continue to find good people. But I think all the efforts over the last 5 years or so have really started to reap some fruit.
Yeah, well, you ended up in victory lane. I mean, the proof is in the performance, as they say. So when you guys aren't at the track, you're into vintage racing. I was talking to Justin Gurney the other day. He told me, what do you have, Jerry Grant's 66 Eagle?
Right.
Yeah, so you run that vintage racing?
Well, it's not done being restored yet,
Okay.
and but fairly soon. And I'll take it to Indy, I think, and just putt around with it. I didn't buy that car for to race. I bought that car to just look at and smile, because I think the 66, 67 Eagles maybe are the most beautiful racing cars ever built. Of course, a testament to one of my heroes, Dan Gurney. I knew Jerry. Interestingly, I knew Jerry for many years when he was with Champion Spark Plugs back in the 80s and 90s. And Jerry was a very accomplished driver. So that car to me is a collector's item. And so that's what it's going to, more than anything, that'll be at shows and things like that. So it's not really going to be driven hard, at least. But yeah, and then I just bought, we're going to restore the 74 Eagle that Wally Dallenbach put on the front row at Indy in 74. And I've got a few other old race cars in there. So it's, for me, it's, Ed, I've always been a fan. I was a fan to begin with. And I'm still a fan. That's why I got in racing, because I was a fan. And so I love, I love these old cars. I love what they represent. I love the stories of the people who drove them. And interestingly, one of the few good things the internet's been able to do is get people who actually worked on these cars in the day together. So I've got one of the guys who worked on the car in '66 at Indy is working for J&L Fabrications up in Seattle, which is a restoration historic racing group. And I mean, it's amazing, the stories and the things you hear and find out. And I mean, it's like putting a puzzle together. So it's very cool. And so for me, that's, these won't be raced in any anger, but they'll certainly be showed around for sure.
Well, those are two great cars and two great drivers. Jerry was a great guy, as you said, and Wally Dallenbach was a unbelievably good driver in his day. And I mean, that was would be a Pat Patrick team.
That's correct. Yep. STP car, and he won a heat race in Ontario in 75 with that car.
I was there. I was there that day. Those guys, he and Gordon Johncock, they were
good team.
Tough. So, do you have a favorite track in your career?
Oh yeah, I think my favorite track here in North America is Road America. I don't think there's a better track. Now, some of the tracks which I used to like a lot are no longer with us. Riverside was a really challenging racetrack, great track. A lot of them have been changed. That's one thing I say about Elkhart Lake. Elkhart Lake is the same today as the day it was built in 1955. And I don't know of any other circuits in North America, or maybe anywhere, where they're exactly the same as the day they were built. And I just love Elkhart. I think every driver, I've never heard a driver say they didn't like it. So I'd say that probably, but if I looked at, I've spent years in Europe racing, and to race the Nürburgring, the original Nürburgring was an unbelievable challenge, unbelievably special. I said every lap there was like an experience, because it was, so long around, so many corners, and if you hit one corner just right, a blind corner or whatever, it just felt like you really had done something special. I was fortunate to drive a lot of great circuits in Europe, but I would say to have raced at the Nürburgring was really something special. So maybe that would be number one. But in terms of more common type circuits, I think Road America is by far the best. At least in North America, Spa is a fabulous circuit in Belgium. I would love to have driven the original Spa, but the new one's pretty darn good. And, in Le Mans, of course, it's been changed quite a bit, but I drove it without the chicanes on the Mulsanne Straight and with a lot of the old circuit there. So I had a chance to drive on a lot of great tracks over the years, but I would say, I'd say the Nürburgring for the greatest experience and Road America for the greatest circuit in North America.
Well, Well, I have to say, I totally agree with you. The thing that I love about Road America is also the way that it's managed.
Yeah.
The facilities are beautiful. The ownership, the way they've got that structure, just seems to really work. I mean, and you really could, between us, we could come up with a whole list of things that they really have got set up there. And it is an amazing place. There's no doubt about it. And Nürburgring, well, man, I mean, I look at that and then I think about your team drivers, Connor DeFilippe, who I know, and won there in the 24. And I think when I look at Nürburgring and having been around it, there's just no margin for error in that track.
Well,
anywhere.
Well, there's more, believe it or not, there's a lot more now because they've opened it up, but it's still the same track pretty much. And it used to be lined by hedgerows, which frankly worked pretty well, but there was it was a track and it was a hedgerow. That was it. And those hedgerows grow up to be pretty strong. But yeah, it's just an amazing experience. Anybody who's interested in racing, they go to Europe, you can drive around it for, I don't know how much it costs now, but it's not too much. And just to drive around is something special.
Yeah, and you come flying around a corner, if you're that bold, you might end up passing a bus.
Exactly.
Who knows what lies around the corner as you go slow. It's a free.
I remember in '79, I drove the Formula 2 race there, and I was on the second row, I think. But the night before the race, a lot of the fans were there, and there's this one area down by Adenau Bridge, and all the fans sit up on this hillside, and the track was still available, for people to drive. And you got motorcycles, you had cars, and there were more accidents. There was more, I don't care what, motorcycles, cars, and you can see the videos, in fact, on YouTube and stuff of people rolling their Volkswagen Bugs with their family in it, their kids, it's just nuts. They didn't shut it down. They just kept it. It was really something else. And anybody who's been there's got a lot of great stories for sure.
Yeah, they have a different legal system over there.
Very different.
Very different. Trust me. Yeah. I remember when I went around with Phil Hill, came out our bridge going up the hill there. That's where Peter Collins crashed. And, but anyway, well, Bobby, it's sure been spending time with you today. And again, once again, congratulations. And for everybody at the museum, I know they very much appreciate your involvement in the Petersen Museum and you being on the board and just great to have this time with you.
Well, I appreciate it. It's been a real honor for me. It's a fantastic board. The board members are very accomplished people in their own right. I think it's a museum that's in very good hands, I would say, both from a board standpoint and then, of course, Terry Cargus, who runs it, and the people that work with Terry. And you look at the museum every year. It's just in the things that are happening, even today in this whole pandemic crisis. Even today, the things that are happening, it's just really well done. And I'm just really proud to be a part of it. And, and of course, Bruce Meyer, who's a good friend of mine. I just love that guy to death. And, he sets a huge example, as you well know, and we all try to live up to it.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm Ed Justice Jr. Thanks for joining us.